Welcome, everybody. This is Sacred Datura, also known as Toloache, Jimson weed, thorn apple. There are many names for this plant. It's a beautiful garden plant for Southern California. It grows in full sun, blooms at night with giant trumpet-shaped flowers, pollinated by moths, takes very little water, a wonderful plant for your garden. Also a mysterious plant with much deeper significance across many cultures and times. And that's what we're going to explore tonight. We have a very interesting poppy hour in store for you guys. My name is Evan Meyer, Executive Director at the Theodore Payne Foundation. I'd like to introduce my co-host, Margaret Oakley. Margaret, how are you?
Hi, Evan. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to a very unique poppy hour. I just want to state a mild disclaimer that tonight's episode might not be for everyone. We will be discussing some new things to the show, including psychoactive properties of plants. And I also want to say that the opinions stated on the show are stated by the individuals and are not representative of Theodore Payne Foundation. Back to you, Evan.
This was the best specimen we could find in the nursery. It's the only specimen in the nursery. It's a 4-inch. These plants are much more beautiful than this typically. And I'm sure you've all seen them. They grow wild basically in the streets of Los Angeles, and related species grow all over the country and all over the world. Wherever you're tuning in from, you can probably find one near where you live. If you are in Southern California, you can order this one plant through our plant takeout system on our webpage. And the reason we're doing this whole episode tonight is because of this shirt, the Datura shirt by Leslie Gorin, the artist, which are available to buy in our online store, theodorepayne.org. Get yourself a cool Datura shirt. We're also now offering online classes for gardening Southern California, including how to garden with Datura. So I hope that you will check that out. Follow us on social media at UCLA Botanical. Excuse me, that's my old job, at Theodore Payne. But also follow at UCLA Botanical, because we do have a UCLA professor, a good friend of mine, Dr. David Shorter, who will be joining us soon, as well as Hamilton Morris of Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, who I'm sure many of you tuned in to see. So we have a lot of interesting things to discuss tonight, and we're not going to dilly-dally with the intro here. I think basically the way this show will work tonight is we'll start with a tour of a wonderful garden in Southern California, and if you're new to native plant gardening, this will be your first foray into this really beautiful thing that people do, which is rebuild nature within cities. And you'll see one of the best examples of that. And then we will jump and take a deep dive into Datura, the solanaceous plants, and all of the wonderful and weird things that they do, and they are. So welcome. Margaret, would you like to introduce our garden host tonight?
Yes, so it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Elwell and Corey Odell, who I have known for around a decade through my work on Theodore Payne's native plant garden tour. This garden, or perhaps it's more helpful to think of it actually as an urban habitat that these two have created, is something unlike anything I have ever known before. And I've seen a lot of gardens in my day. It's a very, very unique space. I describe what they've done as some kind of combination of passion project and a deep and perhaps very personal botanic research project. And in their sharing their garden over so many years through the Theodore Payne garden tour, it has also been a really important avenue for community building around native plant gardening. I just want to say up front that there is no way we will be able to do this landscape justice through our Zoom format here today. And that's not really the point right now. Rather, we have a chance to hear directly from these two wonderful humans and understand more about what drives them to continue pushing the limits of this ever-evolving ecological experiment. I thought it's interesting that they started this garden in 2008, and that is the time of our last big economic recession. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome Chris and Corey. Thank you guys for being here, and tell us where you are, both in the city of Los Angeles as well as in your landscape. Tell us about that structure behind you. Hello.
All right. Well, thanks, Margaret. Thanks so much for that introduction. That was really incredibly generous. And we came to the Native Plant Garden around 2008, and the Theodore Payne Foundation was the resource that we found locally that helped us figure all this crazy stuff out. And without you guys, none of this would have happened. So anyway, thank you. This garden, so this garden, we call it Casa Apocalyptica, the first and only example of the California apocalyptic style of gardening. And we say that because we're in a very, very urban area here. You probably can't see it yet, based on what you're just seeing on this little screen. But and in particular in that recession that you mentioned, it did feel pretty apocalyptic around here. I mean, we were really surrounded by auto body shops and, you know, boarded up storefronts and the occasional bar, and now a lot of weed shops and you know, there's freeway noise and police helicopters, all the stuff you get in the in an urban area. But we were fortunate to find a property that was in terrible shape, but had a lot of land associated with it. And that's because at the time this little subdivision was laid out, this might as well have been the country. It was conceived, I think, as like an aspirational gentleman, country lady place to live, but for nouveau riche people. So they got this. So they laid out these lots really big, and this was even before the streetcars came along. So when we got this place, we had this big plot of land, and it was desolate. There was nothing here. There were fleas and a couple of yuccas and an iron fence and lots of trash. A lot of trash and a lot of stuff on the property. So that I'll come back to in a second. So where we are right now is the property is sloped. In fact, I'll walk around and start talking about that.
So I'm an amateur Zoom photographer. So you guys.
Yeah, so we're going to split up now. So apologies if it's annoying, but the idea here is that you should be able to hear us.
You're doing great.
All right, yes. Right on. Try not to drop this in the pond. So this property is a big sloped property, and imagine it as a dirty dust bowl with nothing native on it. And so what they did have was these old houses. Corey, you want to zoom up and show those old craftsman houses because they're pretty cool. And they were on top of a hill. And over time, and there was a power easement across the back. So what people did was they just dumped their trash off the back slope over the years. And so over the course of 100 years, we had lots and lots. When we got the property, there was a lot of trash here. There was a lot of old concrete from failed building projects, Model A car parts, whiskey bottles, lots of metal, lots of glass, and a lot of other crap too, like carpet and stuff. But what it enabled us to do, so we looked at this kind of apocalyptic kind of landscape. We both love the outdoors. We spent a lot of time up in Northern California, where Corey's from, in Shasta County, and we're really inspired by those ecologies. And the idea that those native ecologies could come back in and replace the hellhole that people had created was just kind of the inspiration for this garden. So what you're looking at, sorry, were you going to ask a question?
I just want to note that, you know, the Greek word apocalyptikos means to uncover. So it's an interesting tie-in with the trash situation that you had to grapple with. All right, people are, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
People are asking about the frogs, and I think we need to.
Is that the elephant in the room, as it were? Yeah. I have to talk about the frogs.
The croaks in the room, yeah.
All right, I'll come back to it. Okay. So anyway, we have this slope. So so instead of leaving it as a slope, Corey rented a bobcat and cut the slope off. And we took all this concrete that was on the site, and instead of dumping it, we piled it up and made cliffs. So what this allowed us to do with this part of the garden was create lots of habitat that you wouldn't normally get in a residential garden. One thing you're seeing here is a creek that we built, and by we I mean Corey. And all the water comes flowing down from the top, and it ends in this little pond here. And some of it recirculates to the top for oxygen, and some of it comes up through the marsh. And the marsh is this area here, which is basically a gravel sump. This enables us to have a bunch of aquatic plants And at some point, we were going to put fish in here. At some point, visiting a friend out in Santa Monica, who's by Rustic Creek, the local tree frog, Pseudacris hypochondriaca, was using his bird bath to spawn. So I was over there like working out one day, and I grabbed a jam jar of tadpoles and brought them home and put them in this pond. And we've had an explosion of frogs ever since, like a large self-sustaining population of frogs. And they sing, they chorus in the breeding season, which here is about 6 months of the year. You can hear them up and down the block. Everybody knows us around here as the Frog House. And yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, I don't know if it's possible to see any tadpoles. The light's getting kind of low, but this little pond is about 5 feet deep, and it's full of tadpoles right now. And there's frog eggs. I can see them. I don't know if you guys can.
We can
And
kind
the
of see them.
And the little baby frogs, when they come out, they love the native habitat, and specifically the Amanopsis. They sit on the leaves and they sun.
Yeah.
So I think that that is so such a great representation of your style of creating this landscape. Is you just kind of go for things and try them out, and over many years,
There's a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the plants that you planted there?
Yeah, and also the other interesting thing, and the plants that are here ties in with what's going on in the property. The other interesting thing is, as I said, this is a slope, and down at the bottom of it, historically there was a creek, and the old timers in the neighborhood remember when parts of it still flowed. It's all gone now, but this would have been one of the tributaries into Bologna Creek and out to the beach. And at one point, the LA River took that route, so it was really part of the whole drainage for the LA Basin. So the things that would have grown here are probably a lot of the things we have planted here already, which we did some research about. So everything took really well. This is, these monkey flowers are really happy this time of year. This is Erythranthe guttatus, seep monkey flower. If you've ever seen these hiking, they're pretty common. They come in a lot of different sizes. Like we'll get the little short ones, you get the big juicy ones. This one has some nice little red dots on it. And I don't think they look anything like a monkey, but they have this bilateral symmetry, and people call them monkey flowers. And then the other that we really, really, really love for this planting, for an aquatic planting, is Anomopsis californica. That's this guy. It stays really knee-high the whole time. These flowers are quite long-lived, so this is gonna look pretty good for a lot of the summer. The frogs love it. You'll get the little frogs sitting on these leaves, and they're hard to spot because they camouflage against the leaf, but they're really cute. They're like the size of my pinky nail when they first change into frogs. And yeah, it's pretty cool. The flowers of these Anomopsis too, I think, are really cool. They're very primitive plants. They're very ancient. They have the cone will remind you of a magnolia or a pine, like something that's a conifer or something that's quite ancient. We have these iris leaf rushes, which are so prolific. We're constantly editing them out. And I guess I'll walk up there next. But you want to talk about the cliff at all? Do you want to stick with water, or do you want to?
Let's go over to the Calicortis bed, because we don't get to spend the full hour. Time ticks by. And you're just so full of these kind of wonderful botanic footnotes in your garden, which does lead me to believe that you guys spend a lot of time studying and maybe talking to each other about the plants in your garden, which is really interesting to me.
Well, one of the really rewarding things about natives too is that instead of searching for this exotic thing from somewhere else that is supposed to be really better than what you've got under your nose, the stuff right under your nose is actually the most interesting, because it ties in with an ecology that's here. This bed you asked about, Margaret. This bed is devoted to California bulbs. It's segregated from the rest of the garden because California native bulbs, they're not, well, some of them are difficult, some of them aren't, but they all require dry summer conditions. So we don't have any in-ground water, but we do segregate these so that they're not next to plants that want water in the summer. So that we can just let this whole thing dry out. But these these Mariposa lilies, Calochortus, here were the introduction, were the impetus for getting into bulbs, period, because I've seen these hiking and they were so beautiful. And I thought, how do you get these? And then that was a whole journey, like finding sources initially online and through the Pacific Bulb Society. And, you know, Theodore Payne had them occasionally, but people don't grow them much because they are kind of a hassle. They are really beautiful. And the patterning and the shapes of some of these flowers are really beautiful. I don't know if you can get to the fairy lanterns over here, but yeah. And I think the other anecdote I like to tell about these is that because they're so particular about the conditions they want, I know there aren't other patches of them growing nearby. Like the closest patch of these guys, other people that are growing them, is miles away. And it's a pretty small community of people who do this. So I'm pretty confident of that. And yet the first year we put them in and they started blooming, pollinators that are specific to these plants started showing up here in the middle of the city. And that just blew my mind. Like these little beetles that I had not seen anywhere else except on hiking trails in these flowers in the Santa Monica Mountains showed up in our garden in the middle of, you know.
That's the ultimate question, is how do they know? How do the pollinators find these plants in the middle of Los Angeles? It's one of the mysteries of native plant gardening. Welcome back, Chris.
Thank you.
And
the phone survived.
The phone, woo, great. Okay, so I want
this phone's been drop kicked so many times.
Oh, and we do not use compost, by the way. Somebody asked that question.
Yeah, and so I think the points I wanted to touch on, maybe we can start heading up to the pool area, and maybe if there are some, I know there's a stream orchid in the cliff that we probably should stop and visit.
Oh yeah, here, I'll step in and show it. So yeah, this is a really nice one. This is a California native orchid. It's just about, oh, here you get a bloom. There's one little bloom just starting. They're not super huge and showy, but they're really cool. This is Epipactis gigantea, the stream orchid. Pretty widely distributed in the West Coast states, British Columbia, South. And this one's cool because it's purple, and that's from a very limited distribution. Usually they're green, and this one's purple because it came from an area of serpentine, which is a soil type of seabed that's somewhat toxic and not that many plants can grow on it. But this guy adapted to serpentine, and in the process somehow turned purple, and it's really beautiful.
People are commenting that they're having some serious garden envy right now. I want to touch on your unique approach to gardening with plants. So I think a lot of people, when they get started creating garden spaces, they think of plants as decoration. And you have been really articulate about taking a habitat-based approach. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I think that it really was the difference between, because I've always had plants, and I've always, like, from being a kid, I always had plants. In college, I was living in a room the size of a broom closet full of plants. But where that went from being something I just enjoyed to something kind of felt transcendent was when I started to realize that you could create an ecology with your plants outside. And by choosing a native palette of plants to garden with, suddenly all these pollinators that are specific to those plants came in, and that's bees and that's butterflies and all kinds of other things that you wouldn't otherwise see. And then a bunch of birds come in, and we've had amphibians and salamanders, and so watching that process unfold is probably the most magical part of the garden for us. And it's why, so we're not out there we don't use pesticides for the most part. Well, we don't use any pesticides, I guess, occasionally on the citrus, but we really, the whole point of this place is to create habitat. And the whole point of it is to figure out what plants are naturally going to survive here and thrive, and let them survive and thrive, and not try to force it into becoming an exotic thing that couldn't have conceivably lived here before European people.
Yeah, and I've heard you describe your garden as a combination of bougie, hippy dippy, apocalyptic, and here we are at a pool, which is, a luxury for sure.
Yeah.
But what you've done around the pool is something very different than most poolscapes that we see in California.
So yeah, Corey can just look around it there. The you know, setting aside whether, you know, it is the right thing to do to have a pool or not. I mean, we made that decision many years ago, and we like it and we use it a lot. And it has formal coping around it that ties in with the architecture of the house and stuff. But what we didn't want to do, we've over the years progressively yanked out concrete that used to be around it. There used to be more pool deck here. And we've just more and more and more let it be replaced with plants and allow that ecosystem to just survive surrounding a pool that we go in and hang out in like any other pool. And the look is an interaction aesthetically of wild and formal. So if you could see the outline of the coping, it would look pretty formal, but you'll also see that the native plants spill over into the pool itself. We chose plants around the pool area that bloom in the summer because that's when we're out by the pool. So a lot of them are not blooming right now. A lot of these are buckwheats and plants that'll be blooming in July and August.
Oh, the picture just came in clear around the pool.
Oh, so it took a while.
Took a minute. Corey, we got a little bit of your hand in there, which is what I love about the show, is the self-reflexivity of the form.
Shade the sun a little bit.
Yeah.
So we have a couple more minutes, and I just want to bring up, you know, on a very personal anecdote, I have had the chance to spend time in your garden in the past, and it's almost been an overwhelming experience for me. And I think that I've had like a physical reaction to the amount of biodiversity in that landscape that I might have if I'm up in the Sierra Nevadas or in a place with a pretty intact ecosystem with many layers of biodiversity. So I was wondering if you could speak more to that and maybe how that affects your life and what has driven you to continue adding these layers.
No, thanks for mentioning that, because I think like the density, first off, the diversity of species is because we have a lot of different, because we took advantage of the topography. We have wet, we have dry, we have shade, we have sun. And then also we've tried to keep going to allow density to occur because we are favoring the plants that are happy here anyway. And a lot of them, it just turns out over time, are local. So when we first started out, we might've been trying that cool plant that you only find in Mendocino County. Well, we don't do that anymore. Now, if it lives fine, but otherwise it's probably gonna get swapped out for something local. And so that also allows us to do that. And there's a lot of payoffs, as you say, from like an ecology standpoint to having this kind of density. A graduate student named Jesus Cepeda at Cal Poly did some graduate work here using our place, studying bees. And he was looking at the impact of having a dense native planting in an urban area on native bees. And he found more bees here than I think he did in any other site that he studied. And something like 26 species of native bees. And some of them are very conspicuous, some of them are huge, some of them live in woods, some of them are ground dwelling. But that was the biggest driver of that, he said, was the diversity of plant species and the density of the flowers. And it is quite synergistic. So if you can get plants that are happy, densely planted like this, they start to take care of each other. They survive the summer better. They moderate the soil conditions. They share mycorrhizal relationships under the soil. And lots of beneficial things happen. And then that just brings in a lot more critters.
Yeah, I'm thinking not to kind of take this in a more esoteric direction, but I think the show might be going there anyways in the next segment. I'm thinking about a conversation we had leading up to today about the concept of the ego, or the sense of, you know, myself as a human being so separate from everything else. And it seems like this style of ecological gardening is really a way of trying to recognize our interconnection to everything and kind of breaking through that isolating sense of ego. I was wondering if you and Corey would be willing to share, as in the last few minutes here, any kind of experiences you've had with that in your garden.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm trying to think if we've only got 2 minutes, because I'll get started on this and talk about it forever. But I really,
a couple.
Okay, I feel like, you know, the sense that we have of ourselves as a separate being is an illusion. And when you really you get into what makes a person
a person. We're actually we're like a walking colony of things, bacteria and biome in our guts and like all these things, and then all the things we depend on external to us, that make our lives possible. And we are just one facet of the ecology around us. And our sense of ourselves as an ego, as a separate being, I think is kind of illusory. And once you kind of, I don't know, I find that with that perspective, I start looking at everything else and realizing it's all the same too. Like, you can't understand any plant or flower without understanding the other things that make its survival possible. The things that pollinate it. Sometimes in the case of these native plants, it's very specific. It's a specific pollinator that has to come in and work with it in a specific way, or a specific, fungal or bacterial relationship under the soil that it requires, and needs other plants to do that. And so then you realize none of these things exist separately. And that just sort of ties in with the same sense of the self, that it's not really separate. And that can be an unsettling idea if you're very wedded to your ego, but to me, it's a very meditative idea. And walking out and having the sense that we're part of this and interconnected with it, we're a caregiver here, and also we benefit from it. It's almost like the feeling that you get when you sit on a beach and look out at the waves going, that largeness, or stare up at the stars. Like, you're like, oh, I'm here, I'm this little thing, but I'm actually part of this big thing.
Yeah.
And it also teaches you how to cooperate, right? Because you can't dictate to the plant what you want it to do. So you really have to learn and understand what the plant will do and work with it. And that's setting your ego aside, because a lot of times these plants don't do what you want them to do. And it's listening to them to figure out what they want. And hopefully those two things are compatible with each other. And so, gardens are organic, they create their own lives, and it's about listening to that and not dictating what exactly you think you should be getting out of the garden. Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily specifically for you. You're creating this for something else and other things.
Thank you for mentioning that. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up, and I just want to say you two are my heroes. And I often wonder where you get all of your incredible energy. If people check out your Instagram accounts, they can see more documentation of your garden adventures. And I wonder if some of your energy comes from the ecology of your landscape. So thank you both so much. And I think we'll get to hear from you again at the end of the show. Evan, did you have any final questions? Or are we ready to move forward?
I just am very inspired, and thank you guys for sharing your beautiful space and all the work you've done to create habitat in the city. I think it's really amazing. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from you guys at the end, and they'll be hanging out for our happy hour portion. Instagram name Giant Coreopsis, I believe. I just saw the question come through, but check the details on YouTube and Zoom, and you'll find all that information. We're going to transition now to something very specific. I like that we ended with specificity. This very specific plant, Datura wrightii, which unfolds into many different stories and many different connections throughout time and place and dimensions. And that's where we're going to head right now. This plant has many names, so I'm going to read about one of the most common names, which is Jimsonweed, and how it got that name. It actually is a contraction of Jamestown weed, and it's named for something that happened during Bacon's Rebellion, which was the year 1676. British soldiers basically consumed this plant. And I'll read from a 1705 book by Robert Beverly. He describes the incident. This being an early plant was gathered very young for boiled salad by some of the soldiers sent thither to pacific the troubles of Bacon. And some of them ate plentifully of it, the effect of which was a very pleasant comedy, for they turned natural fools upon it for several days. One would blow up a feather in the air, another would dart at it with much fury, and another stark naked was sitting up in the corner like a monkey, grinning and making maws at them. A fourth would fondly kiss and paw his companions and sneer in their faces. Indeed, they were not very cleanly, for they would have wallowed in their own excrements if that had not been prevented. 1,000 such simple tricks they played, and after 11 days returned to themselves again, not remembering anything that had passed. So that's why people call it Jimsonweed, and that's a pretty strange story, and we're going to try to figure out what was happening there. So I have two guests. The first guest who I'd like to introduce, many of you are probably here to see him, Hamilton Morris, journalist, scientist, creator of Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, and botanist. I'm going to give him the botanist moniker.
Plant lover.
Plant lover. So Hamilton, we're here to talk Datura, but before we get to it, burning question: how are your cacti handling the pandemic?
I think, well, I don't know because I'm not around them right now. I had to abandon them. But that's one of the things that I like about a cactus is that they're very tolerant of abandonment. And I expect that they are doing just fine. I mean, you can usually leave a healthy cactus unwatered for a year or sometimes more than a year, and it will survive, of course, depending on the species and how temperamental it is. But I actually, when you were reading that story, it just occurred to me for the first time, isn't it slightly weird that these soldiers who were English had never heard of Datura before? Because it's an old world plant as well. Like, wouldn't they have been familiar? Yeah. Why would they know nothing of this plant?
They were consuming Datura stramonium, and this is Datura radii. They would have been familiar with henbane and mandrake and a whole slew of related solanaceous plants that pretty much contain the same alkaloids. So yeah, it is weird that they didn't know, or maybe it was just that's all they had, and so chaos ensued. But what's actually going on in these plants from a chemical perspective, Hamilton?
Well, yeah, it's pretty. I'm glad that we're doing this talk because I'd always found it very confusing. There's all these different alkaloids that are in various deliriant plants, and they have a variety of different names. There's probably well over a dozen of them. And I'd always been on my to-do list to sort out all of the names and figure out which names are synonymous and what is what, because it's often the case that different chemists will rediscover an alkaloid and then give it a different name. And then those different names will appear in the literature independently, and it will make it seem like they're two different substances when they're really just one substance. And what really amazed me, and this is the reason I have this whiteboard behind me, because I wanted to make a diagram to clarify this. What really amazed me is that there's really only two really that are of any kind of chemical or pharmacological significance. So, you have really just hyoscyamine and scopolamine. And this is really crazy. I didn't realize this fully until today, although I was kind of like trying to figure it out. You'll find a lot of sources that will say that atropine is a natural product, but atropine is not a natural product. It is an artifact from the extraction of these alkaloids from the plant, because I can go into the specifics with a lot of the stuff. It's kind of in the weeds, you could say, but yeah.
I would say layman's chemistry is good. Yeah. I don't know how many chemists are tuning in. Probably some, but there's 10 people watching who will be super psyched if you get really specific. But
okay, well, I'll just say one really specific thing quickly. Yeah. So one of the characteristics of natural products is that they're often enantiopure. They only have one stereoisomer. They don't occur as a mixture of stereoisomers. So I always thought it was really weird that atropine was natural because it's racemic, and it isn't natural. That is the reason that it's racemic, is because it's an artifact of isolation, because it has this acidic hydrogen that is easily deprotonated. This carbon is easily deprotonated. And so you get this new compound when you're attempting to extract these plants. But really, hyoscyamine is just when you extract it from a plant, you get atropine. Hyoscyamine and daturine are the same thing. They're synonymous. Scopolamine and hyoscine are also synonymous. And no one should even use the word hyoscine. I don't know why the Wikipedia entry says hyoscine. And then if you were to extract scopolamine from a plant, you can also racemize that and produce atropine, which is the scopolamine variant of atropine. So I sorted this out in my own mind, and I'm happy with it. And really, the only two that you need to know are hyoscyamine and scopolamine. And these are the three that are used medicinally. There's some others, but these are the important ones. And they're really kind of amazing alkaloids that have so many uses that, like what we're talking for 20 minutes. I mean, you could go on for several hours about all the different things these alkaloids do. But both good and bad. They're used for all sorts of kind of vanilla medical uses, to like prevent salivation while people are under the influence of a surgical anesthetic, or to accelerate people's heart rate if it's dangerously slow. They're used in ophthalmology to dilate people's pupils. Actually, if anyone here, I had amblyopia when I was growing up. And when I was a child, I'd have to put atropine eye drops in one of my eyes to blind myself every day.
Whoa.
Yeah, which is not like, I think that's not so uncommon. I don't know anyone else that has had to do that, but it is a thing that is done. I'm not the only person who has gone through that.
I was reading about they used to combine it with morphine before childbirth to do like a twilight sleep amnesia.
Yeah.
Which is pretty insane. I mean,
yes. Yeah. I meant to review that because there's an anthropologist named Nicholas Langlitz who's really brilliant. And he wrote a paper that talked about the use of scopolamine in obstetrics, and it actually being the origin of the concept of a truth serum, because
right.
it was observed that these women who were being given these delirium alkaloids to facilitate childbirth would say very weird things that were perceived as being so honest that it was like suggested that there was some kind of pharmacological prevention of dishonesty. And that's where that idea came from. Of course, there is no such thing as a truth serum, and scopolamine is certainly not a truth serum, but the whole idea came from medicinal use of these compounds.
Yeah, they're I mean, truth serums and other like weird uses that were pretty well studied or like administered through the CIA, I believe, right? Scopolamine was one of the compounds they were basically trying. I think was it primarily for like truth serums or mind control tactics?
Well, a lot of the MK Ultra stuff was oriented toward the more classical psychedelics, but there was a huge chapter of U.S. military history that was dedicated to the weaponization of deliriants. So there was a psychiatrist named James Ketchum who worked at Edgewood Arsenal, which was like this military experimental facility. And he developed a variety of different synthetic compounds that were pharmacologically very similar to hyoscyamine and scopolamine with the intention of weaponizing them. The most important of those compounds is called BZ. And BZ, more so than LSD or really any of the psychoactive drugs that the government experimented with weaponizing, came very close to actually being used. It's, I don't know if anyone here has seen the movie Jacob's Ladder, but that's like kind of based on a fictionalized story about government use of deliriants.
So there's clearly like a strange history. I mean, there's the modern use is strange enough. The history is really strange with this, with the compounds within Datura, which I think we'll get back to, Hamilton. There's a lot to talk about there. I wish we had more time. I want to bring in another speaker right now to talk about Datura and its use in cultures, particularly in the Southwest. So I'm going to introduce Dr. David Shorter, who is a professor at UCLA and the director of the Archive of Healing. So David, probably the most well-known usage of Datura as sort of like a psychedelic plant was Carlos Castaneda in Teachings of Don Juan. Could you kind of give the audience, in case they don't know who Carlos Castaneda is, like a little rundown on what he did, how Datura factored into it, and then how your personal life and research relates to that?
Sure. Yeah. Carlos Castaneda. It's shocking to me that someone might not know who they are, but I guess it's a generational thing. I get college kids now in my classes who have found the book on their parents' bookshelf. So it's maybe got a resurgence now. A lot of people have had to have read him because his organization made over $4 million off the publication of his books. And this is a guy who wrote 3 of his books before he finished his PhD. He did that in 1973 at UCLA in the Department of Anthropology. And a lot of these books are based on conveying what he called a Yaqui way of knowledge. And so if you go through any of the books and you just literally index or check how many times he mentions Datura or peyote, you see that there's probably about 40 to 60 references per book. It is an actual centerpiece of his thinking about what's taking place in terms of multidimensionality. And so that their different way of knowing the world is made possible because of their reliance on psychotropic plants and hallucinogenics. In the interest of time, let me just say that there's no proof that he's actually ever done any fieldwork whatsoever. When he was asked to produce the evidence, it was lost in a basement flood. The Department of Anthropology at UCLA won't talk about him, nor will any of his advisors. He has a long history of misrepresenting who he was, who he is, who he was married to, which all, of course, lays out a pattern, you might want to call, of behavior. Now, that's all about Carlos Castaneda. And then in 1992, I started working with Yueme people, and Yueme is the actual Yaqui tribe word for themselves. I started meeting Yueme people in 1992, and in 1995, I was invited to be part of a fieldwork collaborative relationship that lasted 23 years. So I ended up creating a language revitalization device for them, a film about them, wrote a book about them, learned a lot of the language. And in my last 3 years, apprenticed with one of their most traditional forms of healers. And I think that's something that's really interesting about Carlos Castaneda, is that nowhere in this book does he actually use any categories or any words that are Yaqui words. So allegedly he's learning Yaqui way of knowledge, but you never get an actual Yaqui category or a Yaqui word. And I think that what's taking place is, I hate to say this, but there's some threads of truth to his notions of a different way of knowing. But I think the psychotropic use, I think the hallucinogenic use was more of this probably mixed race, part Mexican, part maybe indigenous guy that he was hanging out with that he calls Juan Matus. I think that was his way of opening Carlos's, you might want to say cracking his sacred egg, so that he could actually perceive what is there in plant relations and plant medicine and other than human kinship all along. But he needed the drugs to do it, perhaps, or the trip to do it. And I think that's why trips are still useful, actually, is that they can help you crack that language culture barrier that we have. I guess how I connect to that is that I was hired in UCLA in 2008. And even though he got his PhD from them, he may not have actually worked with them. And I've worked with them for 23 years. So my being hired by UCLA has enabled me to talk a bit more about that history with some political responsibility to the actual living people who are Yueme or Yaquis.
Yeah, the Castaneda story is just bizarre, because why, like, if he knew that he was going to become this pop culture icon and sell millions of books, why would he have done it as a dissertation? And why would he make it all up? It makes no sense. It's really strange. And there's a lot of strange stuff later on in his history.
Yeah.
I wonder, Hamilton, do you have any thoughts on Castaneda that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, he's a little bit before my time. You know, my generation, I think, was more interested in, I mean, I'm even kind of post McKenna and all of that, but people don't talk about him as much. Like in just researching this, I'm repeatedly surprised by exactly how influential he was. You know, sometimes I'll be reading about, you know, a species like Psilocybe mexicana, and I'll think, well, why are there so many references to, why do people care about that species more than Psilocybe cubensis or some other species? And I'll realize, oh, it's because if Castaneda talked about it, people cared. It was like the most important authority on psychedelics at that time. And he obviously gave a huge amount of legitimacy to the use of these deliriant plants that made a lot of people think that there might be something really maybe spiritually worthwhile in exploring them. And I'm talking about kind of young drug interested American teenagers.
I wonder who those would be. Yeah, well, David, one of the things that I've heard you talk about before in your research, I think is really amazing, and it kind of relates to some of these experiences that we're kind of, you know, beating around the bush a little bit, and we'll hopefully land there at the end. But the flower world, can you explain what that is and how that kind of relates to some of the things we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I can actually go right off of what Hamilton was just saying, is that, I mean, I'm a college professor. My classrooms are filled with people between the ages of 18 and 22. There's a lot of questions about drugs. I teach a class on why do we hallucinate, and classes on alien psychics and ghosts. And so that history of science is very much attached here. There's a reason why Carlos Castaneda blew up in the 70s, in the early 70s, post-civil rights area. A lot of people participating in a dropout culture. Hugely influential was Southern California in that, and this hippie connection and perhaps dangerous stereotype on Native people about what the drug relationship was. So when I got to the tribe, there was this moment in which people thought, oh, that outsider, he must be here for the Carlos Castaneda stuff. Like he must be here to learn about, you know, our drug paraphernalia or use and rituals. But in fact, they actually don't grow datura inside their traditional homelands. They don't grow peyote in their traditional homelands. They have a lot of plants, and I've drank a lot of stuff that was from plant medicine, you might not say, but it's not a key component of it. So of course, my knee-jerk reaction is Carlos Castaneda is a fake. Like there's absolutely nothing real there, except they have a different way of knowing. And one of the very first questions I asked is, could you define nature for me? And there is no word for nature. Nature is a combination of 9 different interrelated worlds that are accessible at any given day and time, except a couple are only available at night. But you know, within your quotidian life, you might come into one of these worlds. And one of the worlds is called the flower world. And the flower world is the most sacrificial, giving space. It is a space where other encounters are possible and power is available there. So almost all healers, the healer that I apprenticed with or worked with for 3 years, he got his power from the flower world. And that word sayataka is literally, they can see it in kids. Like when their hair pattern grows, they can see, oh, that kid has sayataka, which means he has flower power, which means he's already in communication with the flower world. And so a lot of times the students are asking me what kind of, you know, drug trips can I suggest for cracking the sort of language culture barrier? And I sort of feel like, well, there's a lot of different pathways there. There's a lot of portals to understand those dimensions. And some of them are linguistic, some of them are meditative, but they're not all drug related or psychotropic related. And in the Yoeme case, if you just simply focus on flowers and the beauty of them, how they connect to the animals, how they connect to medicine, how they relate to you as kinship rather than objects, if you start unpacking that, we literally live in a multi-dimensional world.
That is so fascinating and such a interesting way to think about the world. Hamilton, I want to go back to, I mean, you've obviously documented some of these rituals, like, you know, San Pedro cactus and peyote and things like that. Is there an equivalent of that for datura or related solanaceous plants?
Yeah, I mean, okay, there's a lot, because these are very widely distributed plants that occur almost everywhere in the world. I mean, it's hard to name a place where plants grow that doesn't have some kind of deliriant that is accessible. There's a very diverse array of rituals associated with their use, ranging from the potential use in sort of kind of poisoning / zombification rituals that Wade Davis described in his book, The Serpent and the Rainbow, and I went to Haiti in an attempt to sort of investigate those claims and don't have a hard conclusion about it. But, you know, they do call it the zombie cucumber, and there is an awareness in Haiti of its psychoactivity. That is absolutely true, and that has been repeatedly documented. Then you have a traditional use pattern that's actually very similar to the way that it's used in Western medicine. So in a lot of ayahuasca preparations, you'll sometimes see the addition of a small amount of these plants that could confer some kind of antiemetic effect. You know, it could make it less nauseating to consume the brew. It could also introduce a sort of visionary component as well, depending on the dose. And then you also have instances of people using it in witchcraft of various types, ranging from kind of urban Wiccan practices to everything else. And you have people that are using it as an isolated compound as well for its deliriant effect. But really, if I were to name one culture that is, you know, using it as like at high doses as a visionary substance, I would say it is American stoned teenager culture.
Yeah, and there are some terrifying stories of stoned teenagers doing that. Hamilton, you've tried many things. Have you tried datura? Would you recommend that anyone try it?
I have tried, I've smoked very, very small amounts of it just to kind of dip a toe in the water and see what was going on. I'm very neurotic about dosage with everything. And then when you're dealing with these compounds that are extraordinarily potent, they're active in very small doses. And then you have a plant that has concentrations that vary depending on what part of the plant you're consuming. Every part of the plant is psychoactive, from the flower to the foliage, to the seeds, to the root. It's all psychoactive. The seeds are the strongest, but you don't know how strong they are. So you're dealing with a very long lasting, very potent substance, and you don't know the dose that you're consuming. That's worrisome and undesirable for someone like me that's actually very cautious despite being extremely interested in the subject. What I did try a bit, I read that Oliver Sacks used a pharmacologically related compound called trihexyphenidyl that's used to treat Parkinson's disease. So I got some trihexyphenidyl and I dipped a toe in that water as well. And I just did not find it especially desirable. What I experienced was a little off-putting, and I thought, I've certainly read enough of the Arrowwood experience reports to see that it's not to be taken lightly. Many people describe a delirium that lasts days, in some instances many days, and they often hurt themselves physically. There's an infamous medical case report of someone that cut off both their tongue and penis after consuming a tea made with datura. So obviously that's not what happens to most people, but the point is that when you're in a delirium, and just to be clear, when people talk about hallucinogenic drugs, or even about hallucinations, they're often talking about something that's more technically termed a pseudo hallucination, where you might see some rippling or some breathing of a wall or a change in texture or something like that. But you know that it's a hallucination. You're aware that this is a distortion of your consensus reality that you share with other people. That is not to be confused with a true hallucination, where you do not know that you are hallucinating. And that is one of the things that characterizes the visions that are produced by these delirium plants, is you will not know where you are, you might not know who you are, and you will be interacting with entities or people that may or may not be real. You'll be having all sorts of profound visual agnosias that can range from you having a conversation with a coat that you think is your friend to thinking that your friend is, some inanimate object. It goes in every imaginable direction. And it's truly fascinating. I mean, I think I could go on about this. I'll try to be brief, but there's a lot of psychoactive plants that have a sort of profundity within a cultural context. A good example would be tobacco, where, with most cigarette smokers, there's nothing remotely spiritual about them, but under some circumstances, the use of tobacco can be a very spiritual and visionary experience. What I think is so fascinating about these delirium plants is that you have people that are, very non-spiritual for the most part. If you look at these Arrowwood reports, it's kind of an average Joe high school student guy, who's smoking weed with his friends at the park. And then someone says, hey, I've got these seeds, try them out. And the next thing, they're seeing demons, they're seeing the sky raining blood, they're seeing their dead relatives, these kind of archetypal visionary experiences that are really astonishing to read. I mean, I think it's some of the best drug writing you'll find is the Arrowwood Datura Vault.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you heard it from Hamilton Morris himself. Don't tread lightly. And I would definitely not recommend anybody trying datura, particularly don't get any ideas from watching Poppy Hour tonight. David, I want to kick it back to you. What are you thinking? I mean, I'm this kind of multi-dimensional way of looking at the world is really interesting, and how much you apply that to our world, where we're talking into computers and it's being broadcast to people all over. We live in a strange time, basically. How do you apply these modes of thought to this globalized world that we live in?
I was thinking about Hamilton's one of his shows. I think I was watching it, and he called, it was early on. It was like the introduction to one of the shows. He talked about them as being dissociative drugs. And it's sort of, I want to connect that back to something that Chris said from the garden tour, because that word is actually used in a scientific sense in the terms of somehow the mind or the brain is not associated with the body at this point, or its lenses of perception are separated. But in fact, these are plant relations, which are about association. It's actually about connectedness, which means that sometimes you take allegedly the dosage or the plant and it's supposed to have an effect. And this actually happened to Hamilton on one of his shows, where you're like, what? I did it. And even the like healer who he's with is like, yeah, you did it. I guess it wasn't supposed to be, because it's an association. It's a relationship between the person and the plant. And that's why it can be so dangerous, because it can really pull up some actual real stuff, some visionary episteme stuff, which is inside your actual consciousness or subconsciousness for you to reconcile with, or your ancestral trauma, that sort of stuff. So it's about kind of connecting and relating. And I guess that's a bit about where we've all gone wrong. I mean, ecological collapse is happening because we've seen ourselves in a silo in which the plant world is a resource for us to detract, take from. Of the earth itself is like that. And I think that's why a lot of native scholars and native leaders have been saying we should be at the forefront of the ecological movement, because our science has always been about relatedness and connectedness rather than not associating or individuality. The plants are offering this. The garden that you're walking through is offering us. The flower that you're focusing on is offering us as an example, and also as a focal point for those relations.
That's beautiful. I think, yeah, just the taking a moment to appreciate the world around you is an important thing to do. So we're going to wrap up here. And the way we end every week on Poppy Hour is we go around and we answer a question. And this week, in spirit of what we're talking about, my question to everyone is, if you could communicate directly with one plant, what species would it be, and what would you ask it? And I think we'll start with Philip tonight.
Hey, Evan. I think in some ways it's like, it's an easy pick, but although there are so many good options, I would go with the bristlecone pines, being some of the, if not the oldest living plant species and specimens. I just remember hiking around the bristlecone forest and just like laying your hands on a tree that has been around for, 6,000 years, and just like kind of trying in my own way to commune with it felt really special. And I would love if I could really get closer to connecting with that plant and the knowledge that it has of this planet.
Oh, you stole my choice. I guess that is such an obvious choice. But yeah, I'll add to it, because I'm gonna pick the same plant. I'm not gonna try to like on the fly come up with a new one. I mean, what would it be like to perceive the world through millennia versus decades, and to sit in one place, and to, we try to like make sense of these time scales that don't really mean anything to a human life, and there you have 5,000 years or more represented by one living organism. And that's pretty fascinating. Hamilton, what would you ask plant?
Well, I am very interested in this very small Lophophora Alberto Votechii. Do you know about this? It's like the smallest Lophophora species. I guess I would ask it what alkaloids it contains.
I'm sure it would tell you. Corey, I'm curious what you would ask.
I think I'm going to go with the other end of the spectrum. I think I would ask an annual what I thought about all the exotic grasses that grow here, and if they appreciated all the weeding I do around them.
I'm sure they appreciate it very much.
I hope they do.
Margaret.
I would ask white sage, Salvia apiana, to tell me more about what it knows about how to remain calm. I know that Chumash peoples used it to calm the nervous system, and Dr. David Shorter could speak more to this notion of burning dried white sage leaves to sort of cleanse spaces and energies. But it's a plant that I just love when it blooms. It has this weird sort of figurative shape. And I actually love to eat the leaves raw, fresh off the plant. So yeah, that would be my pick.
Awesome. That's a good lead into David.
Sage is a good one, but I'm going to choose another one because I'm really interested in it from a cross-cultural perspective. And I know I'm not a botanist, so as you in the chat room can sort of discuss, there's things I just don't know. And so I'm going to say a plant, but I actually don't know what it is about it that I love. But I love pumpkin, and I think pumpkin's incredibly powerful. Like, I always feel like pumpkins are powerful. And I spent some time on the Navajo reservation, going up there for NAC meetings. And one of the things that was always told to me was that we wish you wouldn't throw your pumpkins away after Halloween. Like, they were like, we can't believe you guys throw away pumpkins after Halloween, or that you carve them up, because they're one of the more powerful beings in our world, are these pumpkins, and you guys just cut them up and throw them away. And I kind of want to just check in with pumpkin and be like, why are you so amazing? Because I actually love everything pumpkin. And pumpkins grow on my property, and I never plant them. I don't know why they're actually growing. It's almost as if some bird is pooping them or spitting them out on my land or something.
And I think the final person here is Chris. Is Chris still with us? Yeah, there he is. He's on mute though. Unmute yourself, Chris.
I just saw a hooded oriole fly by, and that almost never happens here. I would go to the Central Valley, and I would find the oldest bunch grass I could, and I would ask it what the Central Valley looked like before people destroyed it. I'm like, of the various quirks and kind of obsessions I have about native plants, one of them is grasslands, and in particular what happened to the Central Valley, which used to drain the Sierra and become an inland sea, and was an incredibly important migratory bird stop, and was fields and fields of wildflowers and grasses and marshes and grizzly bears and elk and all this stuff. And now when you drive through it, it's devoted to agriculture, but large industrial monoculture, depressing feedlots for animals that are going to die. And I guess any connection I could get to find out what that looked like before people trashed it would be amazing.
Read the old Coulter, Thomas Coulter, who was a botanist, Irish botanist. I don't want to end on a a non-positive note, but he came in the middle of the summer, and he was like, California is a rough place, because it was just like,
right.
Obviously it's a beautiful place. And for those of you who are tuning in from other parts of the country or other parts of the world, come visit us in Southern California. Come to the Theodore Payne Foundation, theodorepayne.org. The whole reason we did the show is because we have this t-shirt for sale by Leslie Gorin. You can buy them on our online store, and follow us on Instagram at Theodore Payne, and Facebook and Eventbrite. And so thank you guys for tuning in. This was a lot of fun. And thank you, David, Hamilton, Chris, and Corey for joining us. So customarily, we actually open this up and bring some of the people who've been either prolific chatters or that we know up to talk. And I know Hamilton is a very busy guy, so I don't want to take too much of his time, but I wonder, can we bring a few of these, because there are some chemistry people here, and I want to give them a quick option to interact with Hamilton. Can you give us like 5 to 10 minutes
Yeah.
chat chemistry with some folks? So
Sure.
I've been kind of like keeping an eye on names. Margaret and Philip, we'll go switch to grid view, everybody.
Are you in grid view, Margaret?
If you're a chemist and you have a question for Hamilton, or just have a question for Hamilton, write a chat right now and we'll bring you up. How's the quarantine life, Hamilton?
I found a theremin. I've been
What?
Can you play it?
I'm trying to learn to play it.
Jam for us, man.
I have to. I could run and get it. I'm amazed that anyone, even after building it, I guess his name was Theremin, decided to make a musical instrument out of it, because it is just.
It probably wouldn't be that hard to become the best theremin player in the state. That's amazing.
Yep. So
I
that's
used
what
to
I've been
actually
up
hang
to.
out with a woman who is one of the more famous ones who plays it in London. She has a place in Venice, California as well, and she's really, 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 really trippy. She's out there. Like the instrument matches the kind of people who are drawn to it.
You should get a didgeridoo to go with it.
I look forward to bringing it back to Brooklyn and annoying my neighbor with it. That's it.
All right, we have some questions, and I'm trying to like filter these. So, just so everyone knows, we're a native plant nursery and educational center. So, like, I encourage you to ask Hamilton all of your like hardcore drug questions on another forum. Chemistry, plants, those types of things are great. Hamilton. Okay, how about jasmine flower? Ibogaine and jasmine.
Ibogaine and jasmine.
In jasmine flower, is that a thing? Someone is asking.
I don't
Have you
believe so.
seen
No.
any research on this?
No, I have not.
Jasminium,
It would be very surprising to me if that were the case. Oh, but isn't there some other isn't there like a Taberny Montana, like Taberny Montana divaricata or something that has some kind of jasmine type name, but it's not a jasmine in the typical sense. It's like some other, it's like, do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know. Are there any other botanists on? Who's on here? Where's Nick
I
Jensen?
can check this really quickly. It's let's see here.
Many plants in the Apocynaceae have jasmine scented flowers, so maybe there's like an Apocynaceae.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so yeah, Taberny Montana divaricata
Has
is,
ibogaine.
I don't know that it has ibogaine, but it has a lot of very similar alkaloids. Like it might have like vocangine or something, or coronaridine or something.
And you will be covering iboga on your new season, right?
Yeah.
Is that a leak right there, or can you?
You can talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So when does your season come out? Do you know?
I do not know. I'm editing it by myself now, and I am not an editor, so it's not going fast. It's going very slowly. It was supposed to come out this summer, but things are not the same as they were. So I'm trying to just keep some aspect of it moving forward, and then I hope to be able to film the rest of the season at some point in, I don't know, July. I don't really know. No one seems to know.
Like all of us, it's a lot of uncertainty. If you haven't seen Hamilton's show, the reason that I reached out to him a couple of years ago was because in his episode about peyote, they tour a greenhouse in Thailand, I believe, and there's this amazing footage of like rotating pots of Lophophora, which is the genus of cactus that peyote is part of. And he actually puts Lophophora, the full scientific name goes on TV, and I think I was on an airplane watching Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. I was like, whoa, there's a scientific name on TV. That's a really big deal for plant nerds. So thank you, Hamilton, for giving botanical nerdery a place in the mainstream television.
Yeah,
actually, Hamilton, that was one of the best episodes ever. Like that, of all the ones I've seen, I really love that. As a person who was in a lot of peyote meetings in my life, that guy you talked with and the kind of sort of communication you had with him was key and absolutely shared with some of the best roadmen I've ever known, which is the earth doesn't make drugs, and this is not about race or identity. This is about medicine. And it was really a great episode, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I become so obsessed with these things that I could just keep researching them forever. And peyote is definitely just such an amazing plant. But I'm glad you enjoyed the Latin binomial.
Hey, Hamilton. I just want to say a huge thank you for being our guest tonight. I really enjoy Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. We had a question from Drew and Laura on YouTube about the therapeutic use of California poppy. I was just wondering if you had any experience or knowledge about that.
I have, very minor knowledge, what it has, like a mild sedative effect. Someone else might know more about this than I do.
I just put it, because I saw it in the Q&A, I just put it in the Archive of Healing, and it's got 44 pages of usages, either topical, digested, mixed in as a compound with other flowers, or combined with saliva. So it's pretty well respected as having therapeutic modalities.
David, can you tell us how accessible the Archive of Healing is for people?
Yeah, it's not. It's not live yet. I'm still trying to go through 750,000 data points from around the world and determine which might have issues that are about intellectual property rights, or they might just have sort of plant combinations that are, you might want to say, capitalizable. And I wouldn't want to put that out there for pharmaceutical or nutraceutical companies to just simply like take it and do what they want with it. My plan is that the advisory board will be on board by June, and that we will have a test site ready to go with about 500 of the 800 data points by October. That's the plan. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just taking meetings with people who are interested in perhaps putting through particular plant names, and we're looking to see what's there. And people who are very smart about plants, which are not me, they together in conversation help me understand what of the data could be, you might want to say, useful to companies so that we can create licensing agreements with them.
Looking forward to that being available, because there's a lot of really interesting information there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to be such a negative person. It's just that I, in my profession, I have to be really concerned about things like, who's getting the credit for where the information came from, right? So, I just put in poppy right here. I put in California poppy in the archive because I can access the whole database, and it's got 3 pages on kidney stones alone. So I don't know if that's known. I have to actually be in conversation with people to know what is the relationship between California poppies and kidney stones. So I can't just go live with that.
That's really weird. I'm going to look into that.
When I've looked into before what the medicinal properties of plants we grow are, one thing that really struck me was, and granted, this is very cursory research, so it's not on the par of anybody else on this panel, but one thing that really struck me was how many things were indicated for headaches, indigestion, and menstrual cramps. And it struck me that maybe those are just because those are common and intractable things that humans are always looking for something to cure with, and not because the plants are effective. I don't know if David has a response on that.
No, I think you're really right. That's one of the things that a lot of these plants are about, the relationship, like, which I've said 3 billion times today, but they're also about the performance that comes along with them. And so, one of the things that we study in my healing classes, Healing Across Cultures, is that when someone pays attention to you, you feel better, right? And so a lot of the same plants that you have being used for one thing are used for something else too. And you're like, well, how can they both be useful? And that's because someone's applying them with care from a plant world to a human world transition. There's a lot to be said about how that's missing from our current medical system, frankly, but I try not to be too moralistic about that stuff.
Well, folks, we're getting towards the end of our show here. Thanks everyone for coming out. I want to end with Hamilton. There's a couple questions. You can just mash these up, Hamilton, however you'd like. One question is, what's your favorite genus of cactus? Shout out to the cactophiles out there and the cacti and succulent societies. Hope you guys are tuning in. And the other question is, what's your favorite plant? So take whichever one you like, and then that'll be the last question of the evening.
Okay. Favorite cactus genus would just be Lophophora. I mean, I could say something else, but I would be lying if I did. And favorite plant in general? I mean, I'm pretty interested in Salvia divinorum. largely because I've had so much difficulty successfully cultivating it in New York. And there's something about a plant that you can't get to flourish that makes you want to just keep trying, and I feel bad about it. So that's been, from at least a horticultural perspective, that's been something that I've been pretty interested in for a long time.
It's like
wish you-
relationships.
Yeah.
I wish you all the luck in cultivating Salvia divinorum, Hamilton, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Stay well, and we'll see you next week. We have Kat Superfiski, founder of Grown in LA and urban ecologist for the city of Los Angeles, and Leela Higgins, who wrote Wild in LA, a fantastic book about nature in Los Angeles. Tune in 5:30 Pacific time next week. Thanks everyone. Happy Poppy Hour.
Thanks, everybody.
See you, everyone.